the Therapeutic Quest. An analyst can help his patient just as far as he himself has gone and not a step farther. C.G. Jung, Collected Works, Volume 16. The object of therapy is not the neurosis, but the person who has the neurosis. Jung, Collected Works, Volume 10. In recent decades, we have witnessed a phenomena I would never have thought likely when I entered medical school in 1956. In those days, we accepted without question the idea that all forms of illness would ultimately be defeated by the triumphant progress of medical science. But nowadays, we have to modify that view. Although new discoveries have continued to be made, new drugs introduced, and new surgical techniques developed, there has, at the same rate, been a remarkable renaissance of alternative therapeutic traditions, such as chiropractic, acupuncture, herbalism, yoga, aromatherapy, and so on, which orthodox medicine regards as hopelessly unscientific and therapeutically useless, the esoteric refuge of the ignorant, the credulous, and the half-baked. Why should millions of our contemporaries display disenchantment with the wonders of modern medicine on such a scale? Clearly, for all its technological miracles, orthodox medicine is failing to provide its patients or its potential patients with what they require. How are we to understand this fascinating phenomena? The growth of alternative therapies, despite the advances and the opposition of orthodox medicine, is a direct consequence of an archetypal predisposition in the 2 million-year-old within us to seek out forms of treatment that have always been known to be healing. This archetypal need lies at the heart of the therapeutic quest. Conventional doctors are seen as deficient when they fail to meet this need, when their clinical detachment and their emphasis on technology leave the 2 million-year-old feeling unconsidered, abandoned, and bereft. How is this sad failure to be rectified? It will not be, I believe, until we understand that the doctor-patient relationship is an archetypal relationship, which has been with us since the beginning of time. If the goal of the therapeutic quest is to be achieved, it will not be solely through faith in scientific progress, but also through a journey around that mysterious kingdom where the archetypal healer reigns eternally as monarch. There are two avenues of approach to this awesome power: the outer and the inner. By using these two approaches, we shall attempt to discover what it is that the 2 million-year-old patient is questing for, and what it is in practice that he or she usually gets. The anthropological approach. When feeling under the weather, what does the 2 million-year-old seek? What have human beings always done when disturbed or disoriented, frightened or depressed, in pain or sick at heart? Presumably, like other primates, they have sought comfort from their kin. But what if the suffering is greater than the kin can assuage? Here, anthropology indicates that professional assistance is sought from the medicine man or woman, shaman, witch doctor, priest, or healer. It must be remembered that we evolved in circumstances of great vulnerability, threatened by the elements, by predators, by hostile neighbors, and by malevolent influences bringing disease and death. It is not surprising that in such conditions a figure emerged possessing great power and importance. That figure was the healer, whose role was crucial in all cultures, whose status was invariably higher, usually much higher, than that enjoyed by physicians or priests in our society. The healer's ubiquitous power and influence reflect a demand for healing as old as our species, and the associated beliefs, rituals, and practices are among the most striking of all cultural universals. One thing is certain, therefore, healing is based on archetype. This is a crucial point because the archetypal view reveals that healing is not just a matter of diagnosis and treatment. It is a question of channeling powerful propensities that are as old as evolution itself. Indeed, we can see it as being a manifestation of a cosmic healing force at work. Evolution occurs when a dysfunctional gap existing between an organism and its environment is remedied by a genetic mutation that closes the gap and results in better adjustment or adaptation. Nature can thus be conceived as a great self-correcting process. Jung saw this self-correcting process as achieving its highest manifestation in the workings of the human psyche. Healing, particularly psychic healing, and perhaps all forms of healing necessarily involve the psyche, is the art of providing optimum circumstances in which the self-correcting powers of nature can most efficiently achieve their purpose. The healer is one who perceives what is needed and knows how to alter the circumstances so as to make it possible for the organism to heal itself. In other words, healing is an act of enablement. Although it is seldom acknowledged, the most advanced therapeutic interventions of medical science are as dependent on these self-healing propensities as are the ministrations of traditional shamans. Hence the old saying, God heals and the physician takes the fee. However, the attitude of Western doctors to traditional healers has, with a few honorable exceptions, displayed a mixture of patronizing condescension and ill-disguised contempt. Given the great advances of medical science, this view is perhaps forgivable when taken by physicians or surgeons, but much less so when adopted by psychiatrists whose success in treating mental patients is not noticeably greater than that of their traditional colleagues. In fact, studies in Nigeria have revealed that when two groups of mental patients are treated differently, one by Western methods and the other by traditional methods, patients treated by the witch doctor do considerably better. This is not the place to develop a critique of Western psychiatric practice, but it can be argued with some justice that in our society, mental patients receive something less than optimal care. Frequently voiced criticisms, especially by patients, are that psychiatrists do not take enough time to listen, that they tend to treat symptoms rather than people, and that they lay more emphasis on the use of drugs and social manipulation than on the one-to-one healer-sufferer relationship. We can add to this indictment the neglect of both the spiritual and archetypal dimensions, the failure to address the meaning and purpose of the illness, and to understand the transformative potential of breakdown in terms of the patient's individuation, the rejection of the placebo effect, thus prohibiting the use of a powerful therapeutic tool, and so on. When they are called upon to give an account of the achievements of their specialty in this century, psychiatrists invariably talk about the introduction of phenothiazine drugs and of their integrated programs for pharmacological, psychological, and social treatment and rehabilitation, as if these were startling, innovative, and new. In fact, Indian Ayurvedic medicine has used a powerful drug in the successful treatment of psychotic disorders for thousands of years. This drug, Rauwolfia serpentina, was first introduced into Western medicine in 1954, but has been superseded by chlorpromazine, which is not more effective, but is thought to have less depressing side effects. Rauwolfia has also been used by traditional healers in Africa, though it is not known for how long, since no written records exist. Moreover, the use of occupational therapy and progressive programs of social and vocational rehabilitation are nothing new. Similar policies were advocated by William Tuke early in the 19th century at the York Retreat, at Gale in Holland in the 17th century, and by traditional healers for no one knows how many centuries before that. One Kenyan healer reported that most of his psychotic patients worked for him. After a week, some recover, then I do not let them stay idle. They cultivate, fetch water. I send them to market and to the flour mill, and they cut grass in the compound. He said he was careful to assess each patient's capacity for work and allocated only a job for which he or she was capable. All this should give us cause for reflection. The truth is that we are so far from being triumphantly aware of what goes on in a successful encounter between therapist and patient that we are in no position to look down our noses at traditional healers and their practices. Instead of despising them, we would do better to examine the possibility that they may have something to teach us. After all, the techniques of primitive healing are the primordial roots from which medicine, psychiatry, and psychotherapy have all grown. Although I have no personal experience of traditional healers, I have long been fascinated by ethnographic accounts of their work. Reading about them, I am overwhelmed by feelings of awe and humility when I compare their life with my own life. The most impressive thing about them is the degree of individuation required to accomplish the tasks expected of them. Healers have always had to do more than look after the health and welfare of their people. They were the ones you went to if you needed rain or victory in war. They knew all about the gods and goddesses and the ancestral spirits. They could tell you how the world began and sing you all the historic deeds of the tribe. They could also create spells against enemies and provide protection from hostile sorcery. Evidently, what made them effective as healers was not just their learning, but also their charisma and status. As one authority has commented, in the presence of a disease, especially a severe or dangerous one, the patient places his confidence and hopes in the person of the healer rather than his medications. It would therefore seem that the healer's personality is the principal agent in the cure, in addition to any skill or knowledge. On the whole, the ethnographic evidence would suggest that the 2 million-year-old patient looks to the healer for 4 things. 1. Authority or charisma. 2. Personal attention, to be given time to be heard and understood. 3. Knowledge, a corpus of theory and practice from which the healer can provide diagnosis, an explanation, and an appropriate treatment. And 4. Restoration to health and full participation in the community. 3 basic types of healer have been described. Non-inspirational or lay healers treat with rational methods such as fasting, massage, or herbs. Inspirational healers, or magicians, undergo ritual possession, a variety of self-hypnosis similar to self-induced trance of Western mediums, and treat through suggestion, using their prestige. Priests or shamans may undergo a severe mental disturbance, rather like a psychosis, or Jung's confrontation with the unconscious after his break with Freud. This may be regarded as an initiatory illness, or what Alan Berger calls a creative illness. Before we consider the various theories of healing in which these different types of healers subscribe, we must first turn to the inner psychological approach to the healer archetype. The psychological approach. Healing is the central mystery of analysis. All analysts, like all doctors of whatever kind, even the least competent of them, have experienced the wonder of seeing patients who come to them in distress get better. We are often tempted to think this is because of our own expert ministrations, but in our hearts we know it is because of something that happens beyond our reach, and usually beyond our comprehension. It happens somewhere in the patient, and somehow in the alchemy of the analytic relationship. It also happens somewhere in the analyst. At the most telling moment in an analytic session, it is the healer who intervenes and inspires the analyst's words. When we are young and freshly qualified, the ego wants to blur out clever things it has read in a book or heard in a lecture, but that is seldom very helpful. With time, the ego acquires a little humility, learns to sit quietly, and wait for the healer to gather its intuitions and speak. The experienced analyst knows that the healing spirit is present in the analytic temenos, and that it has to be somehow contacted and evoked. The ego then becomes the executive through whom the healer operates, the channel through which healing flows. In an effort to understand the relationship between the Western doctor and the archetypal healer, I have attempted to examine what goes on in myself. The first thing to say is that the doctor in me is mostly ego. He proceeds consciously and logically, at least as consciously and logically as he is able. He takes a history, he does an examination, he makes a diagnosis, he works out the pathology, and he draws up a plan of treatment. The healer, on the other hand, is altogether more unconscious. Sometimes he is accessible and sometimes he is not. Confronted with a disturbed patient in the clinical situation, the doctor in me is sometimes stymied. Faced with the patient's demands on me, the doctor hasn't much idea of what he ought to say. The healer, on the other hand, is seldom stymied. He is more imaginative, far more inventive. That is why I believe the art of healing depends on the constellation of the healer in the self. We have to cultivate him, circumambulate him, relate to him, lend him our vocal cords and let him speak. In my own experience, the most productive interventions of the analyst come straight out of the unconscious. Faced with the patient's suffering, I am stirred emphatically. That is the beginning. Wounds open and we both suffer the pain. Nothing more may happen. But on occasion, and without warning, an intuition rumbles somewhere beneath the ego's feet. An insight erupts, and I find myself giving voice. There is then a moment of electricity. Something changes in the total situation. When it's all over, I think, now what on earth was that? This is not a rare or unprecedented phenomenon. Not even the least conscious, most completely unanalyzed doctor can escape the archetypal field in which the healer operates. For the doctor-patient relationship is itself an archetypal system with two poles, between which symbolism and physical interaction flow. The doctor-patient transaction is like any other archetypal relationship which is constellated between two people, each holding the opposite pole of the other. The parent-child, teacher-pupil, husband-wife, leader-follower, and so on. The essence of the doctor-patient archetypal system is beautifully expressed in the ancient symbol of the wounded healer. The Greek god of healing, Asclepios, was himself taught the art of healing by Chiron, a centaur, and Chiron suffered from an incurable wound. A slightly later version of the wounded healer is seen in the crucified Christ. As with all archetypal symbols, the wounded healer finds the widest possible expression. In ancient Egypt, for example, the dog goddess Labartu was the goddess of healing, but she had two names. In addition to Labartu, she was known as Gula, and as Gula, she was the goddess of death. The Hindu goddess Kali was held responsible for the pox, but she was also indispensable for its cure. The Greek god Apollo, who could cure plagues, also caused them. This brings us closer to the central mystery of healing. The archetypal image of the wounded healer makes comprehensible how it is that doctor and patient are related, not only externally, but internally as well. In every doctor there is a patient, and in every patient a healer. What draws most of us into the profession of healing, I suspect, is the sick patient in ourselves questing for its other half for completion. It is, if you like, our mode of individuation. As therapists, consciousness of our wound and our personal therapeutic quest is a primary duty. Hence the training analysis we all go through. Our wound is our personal equation. All archetypal relationships are acted out in childhood play. Play is nature's high school. It is a preparation for living out the relationship in adult life. It is no mere coincidence that playing doctor and patients is part of the childhood experience of most of us. Indeed, some of us get so fixated in the game that we go on playing it for the rest of our lives. One reason why so many people prefer to consult alternative practitioners rather than physicians and psychiatrists is that modern doctors split the archetype of the wounded healer into its two poles, identifying themselves exclusively with the healer and projecting their wounds into their patients. In this way, doctors bask in the illusion that they are entirely healthy while the patients are entirely sick. Now this has unfortunate consequences, particularly in the practice of psychiatry. By disallowing their own woundedness and projecting it wholly into their patients, psychiatrists add to the severity of their patients' wounds. For their part, the patients are encouraged to renounce the healer at work within themselves and to project it instead onto the person of the doctor, thus adding to the doctor's power and self-satisfaction. This is not to say, of course, that doctors should refuse to receive the projection of the healer from patients. What I am saying is that doctors need to be aware of their own woundedness if they are to empathize with their patient's inner plight. This facilitates the later withdrawal of the healer projection so that patients can learn to cooperate with the healer at work within themselves, thus becoming less dependent on doctors. As all archetypes do, once they have been activated, the healer personates in the personal psyche, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a woman, and sometimes as a bear, dog, serpent, or other animal or object, like the mandala, possessing healing power. The healer appears in dreams and in active imagination and is felt as a numinous presence in the transference and countertransference, as well as in the healing doctor-patient relationship. Freud introduced the term transference to describe the unconscious processes by which patients attribute to their analysts qualities that were, in fact, possessed by significant people in their own past, and relate to the analyst as if he or she were one of those figures. Since the most common imagos to be projected onto the analyst are the mother and father, the healer is frequently experienced as a parental figure. Jung discovered that much more was involved in the transference than this, however. Archetypes are stirred up in the analytic relationship. When projected onto the person of the analyst, these archetypes confer great therapeutic or great destructive power. In Jung's experience, the archetypes most commonly projected onto him were the magician, shaman, witch doctor, quack, charlatan, savior, alchemist, and wise old man. The activation of these archetypal figures seems to be crucial to the healing process, and it would explain why it is that the authority, the charisma, the degree of individuation attained by healers is so important for their success. As Jung observed, you cannot hope to take people further than you have gone yourself. Let us now look at the various modes of healing which prevailed in the world up to the present time. The principles and practices of healing. Enough parallels can be drawn from the mass of data relating to the activities of traditional medicine men and women to demonstrate a fair measure of agreement ranging across many different cultures and over an enormous geographical spread. These parallels reveal a broad consensus on the major theories of disease causation and the principles of treatment on which medical practice has been traditionally based. At the risk of being accused of outrageous simplification, I maintain that these can be subsumed under two basic theories of pathology. 1. Something has got out of the patient which ought to be there, and 2. Something has got into the patient which ought not be there. Each of these theories is linked with its own appropriate principle of treatment. If something has got out, replace it. If something has got in, remove it. One of the oldest explanatory theories of the phenomena of life and death makes use of the idea that each of us possess a ghostly entity, which in our culture we call the soul. This entity, it is believed, enters us at birth or at conception, or while we are in the womb, and has the capacity to leave our bodies in certain critical circumstances. The moment of death is an obvious example. Many people accept this phenomenon as the explanation of dreams, namely, that our souls actually go off and do the things we dream about while we are asleep. Many also accept it as an explanation of one category of disease, described as loss of soul. There are different theoretical explanations as to how the soul can come to be lost, but most are agreed that the night is a particularly perilous time. One might, for example, be waked up suddenly from a dream while one's soul is wandering in a far-off place, so that its passage of return is forgotten, or the traveling soul might be captured by evil spirits. Successful treatment depends on locating the soul and returning it to its rightful owner. This usually means bargaining with the spirit hijackers and paying them some form of ransom, or it may mean a terrible struggle with them to wrest the soul free. Shamans are particularly skilled in these heroic feats. Clinical descriptions of persons considered to be suffering from a loss of soul reveal a condition closely akin to what we call depression. For example, in Peru, the Quechua Indians recognize a condition they call Michco. People afflicted with this disease are physically and mentally retarded, lose weight and energy, display considerable irritability, and suffer from insomnia and nightmares. Western parallels to the notion of the loss of soul range from the departure and return of the anima spirit in the mortificatio of alchemy to the bereavement which follows the loss of someone beloved. Above all, the clinical condition of depression is experienced as one in which something indispensable is missing, while recovery is experienced as the return of the vital spark of life. When depressed, one feels estranged and alienated from self and others. Treating patients in this condition, the analyst becomes the carrier of the soul and the healing energy of the psyche until such time as the patient can take them back. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung diagnosed our whole culture as suffering from loss of soul. He cured the condition himself through his confrontation with the unconscious, a shamanic initiation which gave us the whole corpus of theory, practice, and technique that we call analytical psychology. However, this discipline clearly has roots which go back much further than to Zurich or Vienna at the beginning of this century. Something has got in. In many traditional cultures, illness is regarded as a manifestation of the archetype of the evil intruder. That is to say, it is thought to be an external force or object which has intruded into the body. Such an alien force or object is not merely the cause of the illness, it is the illness. Healing consists of removing it. Among the Nepalese, for example, the healer sucks the illness from the patient and spits out what, on subsequent examination, proves to be a piece of animal or vegetable tissue onto the brass plate. This he hands round to the assembled company, graciously acknowledging their applause. In the Philippines, so-called psychic surgeons carry out operations without the use of instruments. With their bare hands, they knead the abdomen of patients and remove tissues which have the appearance of bloody internal organs. However, when the extracted tissues are analyzed, they again prove to be of animal origin. We cannot escape the conclusion, therefore, that traditional healers are not above the use of barefaced trickery. And not only do they get away with it, but it works. Charlatanism heals. How can this be? As Jung once observed with that famous twinkle in his eye, the world wants to be deceived. Evidently, the object extracted by the healer serves as a symbol of the disease. It is what Winnicott would have called a transitional object. The secret of healers lies in the power of their personality and actions to excite in patients the belief that their disease has been accurately diagnosed and cured. Healers convince them that they are no longer ill but well. This is what hypnosis achieves, and explains why so many traditional healers can make use of trance. The patient's conviction that they are being cured is also, of course, at the bottom of the placebo effect. Much modern practice is no less predicated on the notion that something has got in that ought to be got out, infecting organisms, foreign bodies, poisons, cholesterol, and so on. Modern surgeons are not above removing parts of their patients on the presumption that they might be responsible for making them ill, either now or in the future. How many people are needlessly deprived each year of their appendices, tonsils, uteri, and foreskins? Modern patients love to display their gallstones, kidney stones, and extracted teeth, demonstrating to themselves and to their unfortunate visitors that the cause of their illness has been removed and placed outside their bodies. This is also at the basis of much successful art therapy and the psychotherapeutic procedures of abreaction, psychodrama, and writing things down. Patients put their inner disturbances outside themselves and are relieved in the process. Verbal communication of their inner troubles to a friend or therapist has much the same effect. Healing by exteriorization, the release of pus, emotional or physical, to the outside, is a healing procedure as old as time. One greatly dreaded force widely believed to have the capacity for getting in and causing disease, especially mental disease, is the force of evil. Psychiatric textbooks describe the history of mental illness as one of linear progress from theories of demonic possession through the Enlightenment view of madness as illness, up to the present apotheosis of neuropsychiatry and the dopamine hypothesis. We should not be taken in by this highly suspect version of psychiatric history. By replacing demonic theories with neuroscientific theories, much practical progress has been made, but in the process we have devalued the spirit and lost touch with the meanings enshrined in the old therapeutic rituals and myths. A new history of psychiatry needs to be written, which would do justice to the total human condition, giving attention to what we have lost, as well as to what we have gained. The theory of possession with his treatment by exorcism is the rhizome from which dynamic psychiatry and analysis have sprouted. From Father Gassner's public exorcism of hysterical nuns in 1775, Anton Mesmer's stunning therapeutic successes in Vienna and Paris in the 1780s, and Justinus Kerner's treatment of the Seeress of Provost and the immensely successful book he wrote about it, to Charcot's dramatic induction and removal of hysterical paralysis at the Salpêtrière and Breuer, and Freud's cure of Anna O through the talking treatment. All this grew out of the ancient theory and practice of possession and exorcism. Moreover, the notion that psychiatric illness is caused by evil spirits, which must be exorcised, still unconsciously influences modern psychiatrists in what they say and do. To psychiatrists, mental illness is an enemy onto which they project their shadow, their own unacknowledged illness and evil. They conceive mental illness as something to be fought and overcome. In this sense, the modern psychiatrist is clearly heir to the exorcist. Projecting the devil into the illness, the psychiatrist uses pills and electric shocks to exorcise the patient and drive the devil out. The idea that illness is due to possession by evil spirits also goes along with the parallel concept of illness as due to sin, namely, that the patient has brought on the illness through evil. The healer treats these conditions by hearing the patient's confession, granting absolution, and performing rituals for the propitiation of the gods. Modern psychiatry, like analysis, has replaced the idea of sin with the notion of guilt. There is little doubt that confession in the consulting room plays a fundamental role in psychotherapeutic success. Patients often feel they are unworthy to be members of the human race, that they are beyond the pale. Modern therapists, no less than ancient healers, can restore patients to the bosom of the human family through their healing administrations. Theories of evil, witchcraft, and sorcery play a large part in traditional concepts of disease, particularly in countries like Ghana, where paranoid ideas are prevalent. Ghanaian houses, trucks, canoes, and workers' toolboxes are decorated with such legends as "Trust no man," "Enemies everywhere around me," "Fear man and play with snakes." One authority tells the story of a Ghanaian carpenter who got some grit in his eye while riding his bicycle. He made no attempt to have the particle removed, but rushed off to a diviner to find out who had put it there. Jungian analysts understand paranoid ideas as resulting from shadow projection onto an outgroup, which is then perceived as hostile. Patients are encouraged to become conscious of their shadow, to assume personal responsibility for it, and to stop projecting it out onto others. With paranoid schizophrenics, however, this can prove a tough proposition. Here I draw on the wisdom of the traditional witch doctor and employ counter magic. I offer it in the form of a potion, in this case a phenothiazine pill. In our culture, the archetype of the healer is embodied in the figure of Jesus Christ. And his fame went through all Syria, and they brought unto him all sick people that were taken with diverse diseases and torments, and those which were possessed with devils, and those which were lunatic, and those that had the palsy, and he healed them. As Julian Leff points out in his invaluable Psychiatry Around the Globe, Jesus' healing technique was similar to that used by native healers throughout the world when dealing with mental illness. The healer commands the devil to leave the possessed sufferer, transfers the evil spirit to the bodies of animals, and the animals are subsequently killed. There is the additional element of water, which is used to wash away the spirits. St. Mark tells us of one psychotic, a vagrant of no fixed abode, who lived among tombs, who approached Jesus and asked him for help. When Jesus asked his name, he gave the moving reply, "My name is Legion, for we are many." The account goes on. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding, and all the devils besought him, saying, "Send us into the swine, that we may enter unto them." And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. There were about 2,000. and were choked in the sea. Numerous parallels to this can be found in the ethnographic literature. For example, Yoruba healers stand their mental patients in a swiftly flowing river. They use 3 doves as living sponges to wash the evil away from the patient. The doves are then killed and their bodies flung downstream, and the evil is carried away by the river. Such measures in indigenous practices are usually effective, as they were in Jesus' treatment of Legion, and they still are effective in the natural world of dreams. Those of us who practice as Jungian analysts are not, of course, in the habit of commanding spirits into animals and taking them to the sea or to a river to be drowned. But such symbolism is found again and again in dreams and fantasies of our patients. It is our task to enable the patients to participate as fully as possible in the psychic drama as it is played out. In this, we perform the same role as traditional healers. Attaining the goal. Healers have always understood the importance of ritual. In ancient Greece, for example, there were more than 300 sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepios. These were places of great beauty, surrounded by hills, woods, and sacred streams, in close proximity to the sea. To get to an Asclepian required a long, hazardous journey by ship and donkey. When you arrived, you underwent ritual purification. Your clothing was removed. You drank and bathed in the sacred waters, and then you put on clean clothing. In the altar you made sacrifice and paid homage to Asclepios. Then you were led into the Abaton, the sacred abode of the god. There a sleeping draught was administered and you were left to sleep. On the ground in the earliest times, but later on a couch, called the Klein, the forerunner of the Freudian analytic couch, and the examination table of the doctor's clinic. You then went to sleep, and Asclepios, or his symbolic representative, the serpent, which bit the afflicted part, invariably appeared to you in a dream, conveying a message of healing that could itself be instrumental in producing a cure. The dream required no interpretation. The experience was itself the cure. The influence of Asclepios began to decline after the time of Hippocrates, who died in Larissa in 356 BC at the astonishing age, if the scribes are to be believed, of 104. Hippocrates is celebrated by medical historians for his, I quote, forthright rejection of the magic and sorcery of the priest healers of the Asclepian cult, and for his emphasis on observation, rational diagnosis, and established remedies. It is tempting to see this moment in history as the origin of the conflict between orthodox medical science and alternative therapeutic traditions, but I suspect that the conflict is much older than this. It is an expression of our ancient archetypal propensity for polarizing issues and taking sides. Ultimately, such conflicts are a function of the evolutionary history of the human psyche and are related to the fundamental structure of the human brain. With our modern understanding of cerebral lateralization and the different functions of the two sides of the brain, we can see that in being more rational and eschewing magic and the use of ritual, therapeutic medicine has become increasingly dominated by the thinking function and has become the preserve of the left cerebral hemisphere with its sequential, verbal, digital modes of functioning. Modern physicians and psychiatrists are the heirs of Hippocrates, while alternative therapists and analysts are the heirs of Asclepios, upholders of the feeling, symbolic and intuitive functions, operating more in the realm of the right cerebral hemisphere, holistic, non-verbal, and analogical, and the limbic system of the old mammalian brain and its archetypal modes of response. In my view, both approaches have their place, and each is impoverished if deprived of the other. Alfred J. Ziegler has referred to these two therapeutic approaches as sanistic, from the Latin sanitas meaning health, sanis meaning healthy, and sanare to make healthy, for the Hippocratic left-brain approach, and morbistic, relating directly to the morbid quality of disease, for the Asclepian right-brained mode. They can also be described as allopathic and homeopathic, respectively. Sanistic therapies are full of solar symbolism, and the gods who rule over them are sun gods, Apollo, Heracles, and Helios. The symbolism of the morbistic approach, on the other hand, is anything but solar. On the contrary, it is underworldly. In Greek mythology, the most heroic deed of Apollo was to overcome a being who was his absolute other, the monstrous Python, which inhabited the swamp near Delphi and threatened to destroy all humanity. This symbolizes the apotheosis of the dominant left hemisphere and its triumph over the world through the use of reason, discipline, and self-control. The relationship between Apollo and Python can be traced in the fourfold evolutionary structure of our brain, shown in Figure 2. Earlier I mentioned Paul MacLean's concept of the triune brain, the idea that the human brain is not, as was previously thought, a single organ but three brains in one, each representing a stage in evolutionary development, and each with its own intelligence, memory, and patterns of behavior. Los Angeles neuroscientist Jim Henry has argued that the dominant hemisphere represents a fourth and most recent cerebral development, which is peculiar to our species. In Jungian terms, synesthetic therapies mobilizes the energy of the conscious ego, while morbistic therapies are designed to mobilize those of the self. These parallels and associations are summarized in Table 2. Morbistic therapy is, in Ziegler's phrase, empathy-based therapy. Instead of fighting or suppressing the illness, one goes down into it, taking it on as a legitimate part of the order of things. In contrast to the synesthetic left hemisphere approach of post-Hippocratic medical science, analysis is inclined more to the otherworldly, morbistic approach of the Asclepian alternative. Analysis is empathy-based, as are homeopathy and shamanism. Through the training analysis, the analyst learns what it is to be in the patient's place and to live in intimate relationship to the morbid. However, analysis does not favor Python at the expense of Apollo. It gives due weight to both sides of the struggle. The rituals of analysis are designed to stimulate the healing powers residing in the natural world of the dreamer, a world which, shaman-like, analysts know at first hand through their daily work with the unconscious in their patients and in themselves. The Paleolithic underworld is a resource forever eminently present, but Apollonian clarity is not to be sacrificed to the Stygian depths. Dialogue is the way between upper and lower, inner and outer, linking the contemporary with the archetypal world. To Jung, mental illness resulted from a loss of contact between the subjective and objective psyches, between conscious and unconscious personalities, between the ego and the self. The way to healing was to bring the two sides together, in other words, to activate the psychic function which he called transcendent. The transcendent function represents the unconscious will to health. It is the principle of individuation in action, an expression of the profound human longing to evolve toward a higher level of personal integration and consciousness. As Ernest Rossi has suggested, the aim of Jungian analysis may be understood in neurological terms as the attempt to promote bilateral hemispheric integration through increasing communication in both directions across the corpus callosum, the great bundle of fibers connecting both sides of the brain. Let me illustrate what I mean with another dream involving a sword. This sword was very old and richly ornamented. In the dream, it was dug up from a tumulus and presented to the dreamer, an unmarried woman who was in analysis with Jung. When asked for her associations, she recalled an image of her father holding a dagger, which flashed brilliantly in the sunlight. Her father was an energetic, strong-willed man who had had numerous love affairs and had died when the dreamer was still very young. She had nevertheless formed a strong father complex, though she tended to become involved with men who were weak and neurotic and very much unlike him. Now, if Freud had been analyzing this woman, he would have seen the sword as a phallic symbol and would have concluded that her preference for weak men was due to the repression of her incestuous desire for her father. Jung, however, went an important step further. When she entered analysis, the patient herself had been weak and neurotic. Through the image of the sword, her unconscious was telling her that she could be strong and healthy like her father. In other words, Jung's interpretation was offering her a way out of her illness, a course for future action. The sword represented her will to health. It was a phalos in Monix terms, a sacred generative power like Osiris's Jed, restored by Isis, the ultimate goddess figure, representing the feminine soul. It was a symbol embodying the transcendent function. In recent decades, there have been numerous attempts to assess the effectiveness of different forms of psychotherapy, and there seems to be a fairly general agreement that, contrary to the assertions of the Freudians, insight and analysis of the transference are not indispensable to favorable outcomes. It is claimed that certain basic characteristics are present in all psychotherapies, including psychoanalysis: the prestige and genuineness of the therapist, the positive relationship established with the patient, a shared worldview, a belief on the part of the patient that the procedure will prove helpful, and so on. All these enhance the main therapeutic influence, namely suggestion. Now, I would not wish to deny the importance of suggestion, but I believe it is important only because of its influence on more fundamental forces. I refer to the endogenous powers of healing present in the patient. Psychotherapy, autogenic training, hypnosis, meditation, divine healing, relaxation techniques, the placebo response, and a whole host of alternative techniques work when they do work, because they succeed in activating these endogenous powers. Jungian theory sees itself as going one step further than this. Indeed, its course can be understood as one long process of mobilizing the transcendent function, using dreams and active imagination to grant the ego access to the archetypal world within. The relationship between these two realms of experience is represented by the belief of many West African peoples in a prenatal contract made by each individual with a heavenly double. According to this West African view, before you enter the world, you draw up a contract with your double as to what you will do in the course of your life, how long you will live, what your life's work will be, how you will serve your community, whom you will marry, how many children you will have, and so on. Then just before you are born, you are led to the tree of forgetfulness, which you embrace, and from that moment, you lose all conscious recollection of your contract. However, you must nevertheless live up to all your contractual undertakings. If you do not, you will become ill, and you will need the help of a diviner, who will use all his skill to make contact with your heavenly double, and discover what articles of the contract you are violating or failing to fulfill. In our Western society, the role of the diviner is taken over by the Jungian analyst. By attending to the Paleolithic inner world, we can not only further our personal individuation, but make our own contribution to redressing the gross imbalances of our culture. Can we do any more than this on the political, social, or ecological front? This, it seems to me, is the crucial question of our time, and it is far too enormous to be answered here, but we can at least frame it in the terms we have been using. If many of our psychic ills are due to the frustration of the archetypal intentions by the circumstances in which we now live, what may we do about making the 2 million-year-old man or woman within us feel more at home in the contemporary world? We can drastically reduce the world's population over the course of the next 2 centuries, reverse the rapid destruction of natural habitats in the ecosystem, reestablish the centers of human life in small, mutually supportive communities, promote a reverential attitude to all creation, allow a new mythic or religious orientation to emerge, enabling us to see ourselves as the servants of nature rather than the masters. The list is endless. There is no knowing how any of this may be achieved, but if the Self wills it, it must be achievable. To gain access to the archetypal world, to begin to know the unknowable, is at least a beginning. The natural world of our planet now depends for its whole future survival on what it can achieve through its intrapsychic representatives, the primordial survivor in ourselves.